Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money, I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. Hey everyone, for today's episode, I was able to bring onto the pod once again Konstantinos Kolokotronis. Konstantinos is an independent journalist and researcher who focuses on geopolitics and contemporary power politics in the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean. The discussion we had was on an article that Konstantinos wrote titled The Imia Crisis, 30 Years On, The Perils of Self-Abnegation, which zooms in on a couple of tiny Greek islets that, a little over 3 decades ago, became a flashpoint that nearly led to 2 NATO allies to go to war with each other, Greece and Turkey. At the end of the conflict, 3 Greek officers lost their lives, and to this day, the islets of Imia remain off limits, oddly enough, even to the Hellenic Republic that they belong to. We covered a variety of topics like international law, the realist view of international relations, Greek security concerns, treaties that outline the status of these islands, like the Treaty of Laussane and the 1947 Paris Peace Treaty, Turkish aggression and expansionism in the Aegean, and the limits of international law in a world without global police. Please check out Konstantinos' work on substack.com/@Polity21 blog, where he's written about a lot of interesting articles on topics like this, and please support his work. Lastly, I want to give a big shout out to our Patreons. Darth Mater at the rank of Taxiarchos, Megas Yorgos at the rank of Zoarchos, Rong Tao Wu at the rank of Elephantarchis, and our most recent Patreon, Expat Frank, who signed up for the rank of Taxiarchos. I can't tell you guys how much it means to me to get this kind of support. But most of all, I love the feeling of building a community of people who love these kinds of conversations. So please subscribe, like, give 5-star reviews, become a Patreon, tell others who might like this kind of stuff, whatever. Whatever you can do to support this project. I love you guys. You are what gives me and other historians and researchers and journalists like Konstantinos, for example, the motivation to keep doing what we love. So thank you so much. Again, please support the work of independent historians, researchers, and journalists like the guests we have on this show. And now on to the interview. Yeah, let's start it off with which I think will be the best way to kind of set the stage with everything and give the listeners a good idea of just geographically speaking. If you could talk a little bit about what is Imia first off, and then where is it generally speaking? Now, it doesn't be down to the latitude and longitude, but just generally speaking.
Yeah, so Imia is basically two uninhabited rocks, small islands. They're situated, roughly speaking, in the southeastern Aegean. So, I mean, broadly, they're part of the Dodecanese complex.
Okay.
The nearer Greek island is Kalolymnos. Not Kalymnos, it's Kalolymnos. It's a different island,
Oh,
and
different. Okay,
it's
yeah.
uninhabited, I believe. I mean, there used to be people back in the 1990s, but now I believe as of 2025, it is uninhabited, much like Imia.
Hmm.
And its distance from the Turkish coast, I think, is approximately 3.5, 3.2 miles. So it's pretty
Interesting.
close to the Turkish coast. It's outside of the 3 nautical mile limit, which, I mean, if people are familiar, if not, that's fine. We can reiterate it. But with the Treaty of Lausanne, effectively established that any, Greek island, any island for that matter, any territory outside the 3 mile radius from the Turkish coastline, from the Anatolian coastline, would effectively be Greek. That's
Got
what
it.
the Treaty of Lausanne says, that Turkish sovereignty is restricted within 3 miles of the Turkish coast.
So pretty much anything 3 miles close to Turkey and 3 miles or less than 3 miles belongs to Turkey. More than 3 miles, Greek. Am I understanding that
Yes,
correctly,
yes. I
or
mean, very roughly speaking,
very
unless, of
roughly
course, there are
speaking?
islands which are explicitly mentioned to be
Right.
Turkish, like
Per the treaty.
Ingros, Tenedos, for example.
Got it.
So
Got
these,
it.
I
Got
mean,
it.
they exist obviously outside the 3 mile limit, but since they're explicitly mentioned in the Treaty of Lausanne as Turkish, therefore they're Turkish.
Got it.
So
Per the
that's
treaty.
the
That's what I was just going to ask next as well. What is, so happy you answered that for us, but, pretty much what deems these Hellenic versus Turkish rocks. But let's talk a little bit about the 1947 treaty, because, I mean, since you brought it up, because Lausanne was signed between Turkey and
yeah,
Greece. Lausanne, or I'm sorry, the 1947 agreement that was signed between Greece and Italy, correct?
Italy, yeah, correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the more specific treaty that pertains to the status of Imia. I mean, with the exception of Lausanne, of course.
Right.
So this was signed, I mean, after World War II, obviously. I mean, Italy, being one of the Axis powers, they lost the war, and therefore one of Greece's territorial claims as, belonging in the winning side with the Allies was to claim, the whole of the Dodecanese,
Got
which,
it.
before World War II, they were under Italian sovereignty. So the 1947 peace powers effectively ceded the Dodecanese, including Imia, the Imia islets, which are dependent rocks, they're adjacent rocks
Mhm.
to those bigger islands explicitly named in the treaty, and they were ceded to Greece. So this is a bilateral, I mean, multilateral agreement, but it's the two parties concerned are Greece and Italy. So
Right.
Turkey is not mentioned, obviously, in the
Right. Right. Right.
agreement. Turkey did not participate in World War II, as a matter of fact. Therefore, this is what perplexes the Turkish claim: the fact that they're claiming territory which, even though the deal that regulates the sovereignty of Imia does not mention Turkey anywhere inside it,
They're
right?
they're completely outside of the agreement.
Yeah, yeah, they're completely outside the legal framework. Yet, in the context of the 1996 crisis, they filed a claim over the Imia islets. Yeah.
Well, that's a great segue. In other words, they entered themselves into the into the
Yeah.
now. Okay. So let's move on to what are the startings of the EMEA crisis. And for the listeners too, I'll attach your article too, which is a really great article. It touches on a lot of international relations, kind of game theory type stuff. If anyone's into Mearsheimer and Kenneth Waltz's what's the book, Man, the State and War,
Yeah, yeah,
if I'm
exactly.
not
Yeah.
mistaken, where he talks about tripwires.
1979. Yeah.
Yeah, which is like if you're big into like international relations and foreign policy stuff, that's kind of like a capstone or whatever they call it. It's one of the must read books.
Yeah, it's a foundational text, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely, for sure. So I did see you had cited some of that stuff. It's been years since I've read those guys.
Mhm.
Probably about 7 years since I read The Man, the State and
Yeah.
War or whatever. So I don't remember much, but I remember the tripwire thing, so that was cool. But anyways, per the timetable, a Turkish freighter runs aground on Imia. This happens the end of 1995, December 26th.
Yeah,
They
correct.
deny help from Greek authorities, on the grounds that these are Turkish waters. Um, I mean, this altogether just sounds suspicious. Are there any grounds or any I don't know if grounds are the right word, any proof that this running aground thing was a setup in itself? Because it just sounds too like very played out.
Yeah, yeah.
But do you have any like is there any indication of that, or is that just kind of unknown to this day?
Well, it does sound like the perfect coincidence to kickstart the crisis, to provide, I
Right.
guess, for an excuse for Turkey to, introduce its territorial claims. I mean, to my knowledge, I'm not privy. I'm not aware of any information that points to intentional, mistake, I guess, on their part on a
Right.
setup. In simple words, I mean, I was reading one testimony by the head of the Coast Guard in the area back then, where he describes dealing with the captain of the the freighter that ran aground, the small bulk carrier Figana Cat, and I mean, in his opinion, yeah, there was no, I guess, indication that there was some foul play happening when
Right.
the vessel ran aground.
Which these
But
things do happen, mind you. It's not like it's out of the realm of possibilities that this could have happened either.
yeah, yeah, it's not. But we're not talking about, I guess, a submerged rock. I mean, it was an island, right? I mean,
True.
it was permanently above the water line, both in low and high tide. So I mean, it's I don't know.
But
It was
still,
a bit
yeah, in that respect, it is
remarkable.
suspicious.
Sorry.
I said in that respect, it is a bit suspicious, you could say.
Yes, I don't know. I mean, it could be lack of professionalism on the captain's part, but it just sounds a bit, a bit too much, because it wasn't like a case of a small rock that was barely visible across the horizon. It was it's a fairly small but nevertheless discernible island. And I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether it was intentional or not. I mean, we can assume
Good
it
point.
was, or we can just accept it wasn't. What matters is the result. I mean, what
Right.
happened right after that? It
Right.
provided the context for the Turkey's foreign ministry to officially claim these two rocks as Turkey's the day after,
Right. So a couple days after,
a couple days after.
that's,
Yeah.
and I guess, that's actually a really good point, right? Because at the end of the day, what does it matter? It set off a series of events. A couple days later, the Greek embassy in Ankara is handed a note by the Turkish foreign ministry. It says Imia is, quote, an integral part of Turkish territory. Um, so at this point, how did the Hellenic Republic, I mean, how do you respond to, what is essentially like a diplomatic protest or statement or whatever? It's not like at this point there's anything militarily happening. Am I correct with that, or?
Well, yeah. So at that point, I mean, it's still early on in the crisis. There's no immediate military escalation on either part. So there's a diplomatic, I guess, tit for tat at this point. That's where it begins. So it's 28th of December when the Greek foreign ministry effectively responds to their Turkish counterparts by pointing out the agreement we mentioned previously, the 1947 peace treaty between Greece and Italy, which provided for the legal framework and effectively answered the question definitively that the Imia islets were Greek, and they also pointed out the 1932 treaty, which was between Turkey and Italy. So it's an older treaty before in the interwar period, which ceded the islands from Turkey to Italy before they were eventually ceded, yeah, by Italy to Greece. Right, so you can follow the chain of chain of events here over the decades.
Right.
So
That's
yeah,
funny because
yeah.
it's like it permanently. You'd think at that point that the conflict would be over if you're just following how things work out in terms of, legally speaking, right? In terms of international relations and going by, rule of law or whatever the case you want to call it, because it, makes a very clear case. It's very clear.
Mhm. So yeah, international law set the record straight from the beginning, before the crisis was even militarized. Um, but nevertheless, the Turkish claim was political in nature. It was not about. He did not care, to put it simply, about what international law said, right? So the Turkish response to the
Naturally.
Greek argument, pointing out to those international treaties, was that the Imia islet were effectively part of the opposing province in the Anatolian coast. But there were yeah.
So I was just gonna say really quick. I mean, it's not something that I wanted to get too much into, but I know you really know this kind of stuff, especially. Well, you're very well read with this. Just for the listeners, because it's modern Greek history. I mostly touch on. I touch on some of this stuff, but what could you pretty much just like in the absence of a global police, right? When you have a party that doesn't want to listen to international law, that's like the basis of what do you call it? Realpolitik, of realist foreign policy, right? Is that the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must, that kind of thing. So and when this happens, when Greece presents with a logical case built off of international rule of law and all that stuff, pretty much then what it opts to the strongest player does what they
Yeah.
want, or essentially that it goes down that route. Is that correct? I mean, at that point,
Yeah. I guess that's international relations 101, and a
right?
fundamental aspect of how the international system works, which I guess the Greek side ignored it in 1996. But yeah, I mean, it's evident that when, as you mentioned correctly, there is no international police force, there is no overarching power to police the international system or affirm the legality, validity of international law. Then it's all about the relative balance of power between states. And I
Yeah.
think EMEA is precisely a tale of how the relative imbalance of power played out. And it also speaks, I guess, of the futility of the American intervention, because I mean, throughout the crisis, Greece tried to at the beginning to respond diplomatically, and even when the crisis was militarized by both sides, the Greek government of Konstantinos never really, I guess, they never seriously considered the possibility that they they would have to go to war at some point, to defend the Emi
Let's
Islands.
let's get
Because
more into it. Let's. I
yeah.
I knew I kind of preemptively asked that question a bit, but I just wanted to kind of prime the listeners. So let's
Mhm.
get through the event. Then after, I'd really like to hear more like your analysis on
Yeah.
what who knows, of course, but perhaps what you would have done and and whatnot. But like, oddly enough, a whole month, if I'm not mistaken, right, passes through late January 1996. There is another escalation. There's a group of journalists, if I'm not mistaken, that go to the island and put a
Yes, yeah.
Turkish flag. Is that correct?
Hurriyet, Hurriyet newspaper. Yeah, yeah. They
Yeah.
landed with a helicopter. They planted the Turkish flag. They replaced the Greek flag that the mayor of Kalolymnos had placed there a few days before.
Oh, okay. So
So, a
now it's
Greek
an issue
mayor
of
for a
flags.
nearby. Yeah, yeah. It's a war of flags. That's how it starts. The beginning. So a Greek mayor placed a flag. The Turkish journalists, they land with a helicopter, and they take the Greek flag away. They replace it with a Turkish one. Right.
And then does it end there? I mean, there's Greek commandos that land as well. Where's the military start to get
Yes.
involved? It's at
So
this point, correct?
right after they realize that the Greek flag has been replaced, parts from the Hellenic Navy is dispatched into the area, and Greek commandos, underwater demolition team, OIK for Greek listeners, they
The frogmen, right?
frogmen, yeah. So they arrive, they land on Imia, and they replace a Turkish flag that the Turkish journalist placed with the Greek flag once again.
Wow. So at this point, still, I mean, it's escalating. Obviously, the military is involved. There's also other provocations as well. There's another Turkish freighter. There's other violations of Greek sovereignty in the air and on the ground. To my mistaken, this is starting to escalate in other places as well a bit, aside from Imia.
So yeah, basically by January 29th, that's when there's a multitude, I guess, of violations all across the both Greek waters and airspace, right? So you have
Yeah,
Turkish fighter jets flying into the Athens FIR, flight information region, without submitting a flight plans. I mean, that's been a usual Turkish practice
yeah. This is
since
actually happens quite a
1994.
lot.
Yeah, yeah, it used to happen a lot. I mean, it still does occasionally, but that's a different conversation.
Right, right,
Uh, and then obviously, yeah, there is as more and more naval assets they concentrate in this very small space in the southeastern Aegean around the two Imia islets. That's when a lot of obviously Turkish assets would violate Greek territorial waters, right,
right,
within the
right, right.
6 nautical mile limit.
This is the quote unquote gray zone per se. I mean, according to Turkey, of course, not according to any
Well,
reality or
yes, I mean, according to the
international law.
Turkish logic, I mean, they were claiming Imia or Kardak, as they would call it in Turkish.
Hmm.
So there was no violation whatsoever, I guess, in their in
Yeah,
their
in their
view.
mind.
Yeah, yeah. But, I mean, yeah, the reality of it is that yeah, they're violating Greek airspace and the waters in the
Right,
vicinity of the two Imia Isles. And at this point, yeah, we should also mention that there are two names for Imia. So it's the Eastern Imia, the one that is closest to Turkey, and the Western Imia, the one that is closest to Greece, I guess, relatively
right,
speaking. I mean, they're obviously very close to each other,
right. They both fall
but
within
yeah,
Greek sovereign borders.
yeah, yeah, but their
Um,
their names are Western, Eastern versus Western. So they're just
Gotcha.
yeah.
So, at what point does the U.S. get? I mean, is there any reason specifically the U.S. would offer to meditate, or it's just kind of duh? Of course, the U.S. would kind of offer to meditate. They're two NATO allies.
Well,
It's
yeah, after the Greek commandos would land they landed on Eastern Imia, right?
mhm.
And I guess the mistake was that they left Western Imia unguarded.
I was just
That
gonna say, wouldn't you? If you're gonna commit to going military route, and at this point, understanding that the rule of law is not working, international law is not working, the international landscape lies in a state of anarchy. Wouldn't you
Mhm.
think it's like if you're gonna go the full route, you should have gone 100% all the way, um, and secured both islets and do a complete blockade. I feel like that anyways. I was supposed to say that to the end, but it just does sound like that was
No,
quite a
no,
bit
yeah,
of a someone dropped the ball there, and kind of
yeah.
went 50% in when they should have gone 100% in.
So
Um,
yeah, yeah. The way I mentioned it is because leaving one of the islands unguarded, this allowed for Turkey to land soldiers there, so create this balance, I guess you could call it. I mean, you have
mhm.
the Greek soldiers on one island, Turkish soldiers on the other, and the Turkish soldiers were illegally occupying Greek land at this point. And it was at this stage, I guess, that American mediation proved decisive to the outcome, to dissolving, to the resolution of the crisis.
Mhm.
And it also relevant to the previous point I made about the Greek government not wanting to defend, its territory by any means available. So they had already written now off the military option. Right, they're not going to wipe the Turkish soldiers out of the island because, I mean, okay, they were logically afraid that this would lead to greater escalation and not allowed to war in the Aegean, which would have been avoided. They wouldn't have to be facing this dilemma if they guarded both islands, right? So
Right.
it
Yeah.
goes back to
Frankly,
this.
put
Yeah,
bluntly, absolutely. And it's also, I mean, of course, no one wants war in the Aegean, but I mean, it's a tough conversation for Greeks, and it's a conversation I try not to get too much into because I'm in the diaspora.
yeah.
I have family my age that would, possibly fight and die, and, you guys over there. But it's that if you believe that war is unfortunately coming no matter what with a belligerent neighbor next door, perhaps it would have been better just to get it done with in 1996 or some kind of, protracted conflict or something along those lines and have this settled once and for all. We're now 30 years on plus, and
Yeah.
there still seems to be, and it's if anything, it's being quite more expanded. But anyways, and that's not entirely.
Yeah.
There's a whole nother direction you could go down with that. Let's finish up with U.S. mediation. So this is another thing, just because you're really good at this stuff. Could you explain the use of fait accompli? And, for listeners that are less privy to that kind of stuff, I mean, if I'm saying that correctly, my French isn't
Yeah.
great, but that's right. Accomplished fate is what it's short for, a quick and already accomplished result, essentially, that doesn't leave the other party time to react, or is that
Yeah, yeah,
in a
exactly. Yeah. So
nutshell?
this is precisely what Turkey did when they landed, the commandos on the Greek island. They forced dilemma upon Greece. So the Greek armed forces would either have to forcefully remove them from the island, and then
Hmm.
risk, or almost certainly leading to an all-out war, or then they would have to walk back and appease, I guess, the Turkish side somehow.
Right. Both
In
bad options.
both, I mean, yes, okay,
A
yeah, okay.
dilemma, right? A textbook
It's
dilemma.
a dilemma,
Yeah.
it is what it is. Yeah, you would have to, I guess, choose the less worse option in
Right.
any scenario. And
Yeah.
I guess U.S. mediation in that case was critical because if Greece did not have the political will, I guess, to choose either or in that case, because forcefully removing the soldiers would mean war, but then to walk back and recognize that there is an issue to be solved here, there is an issue to be discussed with Turkey, would also inevitably drag Greece into negotiations over
Yeah.
the
Be
status of doing,
catastrophic.
right, over the
Yeah.
status of a sovereign Greek land. And that's not what they wanted also. I mean, they definitely wanted to avoid that. The American solution was elegant in a, in a way because it banned, all troops, all flags, all ships from the area. So both countries would have to mutually remove them one after the other, and they called it a return to the status quo ante, which means to the previous situation before the crisis started. Which theoretically is that okay, the islands are Greek, therefore they remain Greek, but without any troops, without any flags, without any ships patrolling the waters. So I mean, if you cannot exercise sovereignty, then what kind of status quo is that? That's
Y-
the question that begs to be asked, I guess, about the role of U.S. mediation and its consequences.
I'll read you something, and then it is a bit ironic. So this is from the article you wrote, which is from, you cite a journalist, Michalis Signatiu, who's a great journalist. Actually, I've
Oh yeah, of
been
course.
following
Yeah.
him yeah, he's a great journalist, great guy. Quote, from that night on January 31st, 1996 until today, all activity on and around Imia is prohibited. There are two Greek rock islands to which neither Greek citizens nor the Greek armed forces have access. So from what I'm understanding, and what the U.S. result of this was, is no flags, no ships, just like what we talked about per the quote by Michail Signatiu. I was going to say it's ironic. I don't know if that's exactly the right word, if this is irony or whatnot, but the anti-status quo, if you're going by international law, right, and whatnot, per the treaties that Greece and Turkey and Italy have signed, would be that these are Greek islands, Greek islets, and whatnot. But in reality, just again per the quote, you can't even land troops on or put a flag. It's a bit paradoxical. I don't know if that's exactly the word either, but
Yeah, yeah, it
um,
is. But I guess in the American and Turkish interpretation of the status quo ante, it meant that there were just no troops there as at the beginning of the crisis. So at
I
the
mean, this
beginning
is
of
a
the
Turkish
crisis,
win.
yeah, yeah, effectively yes, because at the beginning of the crisis you had no troops, you had no flags, no ships, right? I mean, the islands were uninhabited; they were Greek territory, sure, but practically speaking, the return to the status quo ante, which that word, by the way, status quo ante, was also quoted by Turkish officials, which would make you
Oh
wonder
wow,
why would the Turkish officials argue for a return to the status quo ante? So it begs the question, what do you define as a status quo ante? So apparently, status quo ante is literally speaking, the situation where the crisis was not militarized. There was no presence of troops, symbols, sovereignty symbols, and so forth. So
Are
this was
even
the
flags
minimal.
militarized though? Sorry to talk over you.
Sorry.
Are even placing flags, is that in and of itself a militarized action apparently?
No, no, no. It's not absolutely.
Right, right, but that's what I mean, right? You can't even place a flag and,
Yeah.
very
Yeah. So I
it's
guess it was a very minimal approach. So neither Greece acknowledged the Turkish claims. Turkey did not have to explicitly come out and say that those islands are Greek. And the U.S., even though we know nowadays that they knew back then that the islands were Greek, right? Negotiators like Richard Holbrooke was the ambassador, special envoy. He mediated between both the Greek and the Turkish prime minister at the time, Tansu and Kostas Simitis. He said afterwards. Many years after. I think it was in a documentary by Alexis Papachelas that aired on Greek TV some years ago. He acknowledged that the islands were indeed Greek, right? So the Americans at the time they knew what international law had to say about the issue, but yet because it was a conflict between two NATO allies, uh, they assumed the neutral mediating role rather than
right.
siding with Greece, for
And
example.
neutrality, what's the saying? Neutrality usually supports the oppressor or whatever, you know what I mean, in that case, and
Yeah, yeah, supports
the
the stronger
aggressor.
side as it is, or yeah, stronger. Yeah,
Right, right.
relatively speaking, at least. Yeah.
Should we look too much into it that, and I don't know, you could totally correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not even sure if this is based on a reality, but that back then, like today, you could say that Greek, Cypriot, and United States relationship is at an all time high, arguably, right? The 3+1,
Yeah.
yada, yada, yada. But the 90s, the mid to late 90s was very different. Is that fair to say as well?
Yes, yes. I think it's an unfair comparison. When it comes to what the two countries have been through since then,
Hmm.
right? So the deepening and the widening of the U.S. Greek relationship. It took time to arrive at the stage where it is now, right?
Right,
Where Greece has signed agreement to acquire the F-35, right? Whereas
right.
Turkey, has found itself outside of the F-35 club. So development like that would have been unthinkable back in the 90s, where
True.
the US would try to achieve relative parity and would not want to, allow Greece to have such a qualitative military edge over the Turkish armed forces. So yeah, obviously, yeah. The short answer to your question is yes. That they're very different times, and
Do you think that played a role though? Or it's just,
I'm not sure.
in other words, do you think US mediation was
Similar.
pro Turk? I'm so sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, second.
I was just saying, in other words, do you believe that U.S. Mediation was perhaps pro-Turkish? I mean, Richard Holbrooke is held to a very high standard in
Hmm.
like the diplomatic community for his behavior on this, in a good way, from what
Hmm.
I've heard, anyways. I mean, depends who you ask, of course, but that's just from what I've gathered and
Yeah.
whatnot. But do you think that? And I know this is a very loaded question. You probably can't even answer it accurately. But do you think the U.S. was pro-Turkish leaning in this regard?
Well, I guess for me, the way I see it, it's not a matter if it was pro-Turkish or not. De facto, judging from the result, yeah, you could easily say that it was pro-Turkish. But I don't think it was, because it all depended on what the Greek response would be to the crisis, right? So it was the Greek handling of the crisis, or the mismanagement, if you will, that sealed the fate of the crisis, the loss of life of three Greek officers on board that helicopter, which tragically fell due to an accident. So I think the primary responsibility sits with the Greek side. So it's not. It's too easy, I guess, to blame the more powerful, overarching mediator, negotiator. who, I mean, after all, was pressuring both sides to back down, right?
That's a good point. That's a really good point
Uh,
because to give it
yeah,
completely to the Americans also removes agency from the Greeks as
yeah,
well.
precisely.
The-
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah,
So, I mean, I guess the Greeks would argue that since the Americans knew that the islands were Greek in the first place, why didn't you support the legitimacy in the face of aggression, revision, and so on? So that's a normative argument you could make to argue that the U.S. handling of the crisis produced, de facto pro-Turkish resolution of it somehow. But again, I mean, it's a mistake, I guess, to allocate primary responsibility to the Americans
right.
when it was not their, it wouldn't have been their war to begin with, right? If things went awry, I mean, they would have to again intervene more forcefully to stop any potential hostilities. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that if you're not willing, if Greeks are not willing to stand up for their own rights, why would they expect the Americans to do so?
Well said. Well said. Last thing I wanted to touch on is, and I think, the answer is a resounding yes, but we're still living in a post EMEA crisis, you know, conflict essentially with Turkey. Had things gone differently with EMEA, perhaps this whole issue could have been settled once and for all. Um, do you see, is that a simplified look? In other words, had Greece been more forceful or played things differently, do you think they would have stopped right there? Or is this something that was going to continue through even so on? In other words, would Turkey have dropped? Could we have nipped the blue homeland, the Mavi Vatan doctrine, perhaps at EMEA, if we had really taken drastic measures at that time? Did
I
this,
think yes, yes. I mean, there's a
you know,
questionable chance that if the Greek response was more forceful, although that implies, of course, that there would have been a forceful and by military means, a removal of the Turkish soldiers from the island, which would mean, the beginning of an all-out war, right? So, I mean, if you ask the protagonists of the Imia crisis, or if you watch interviews on YouTube, I mean, there are many. Um, for listeners to have a look if they want. I mean, most of them are in Greek. That's a big language barrier right there. But admirals, retired admirals now, they would say that the Hellenic Navy had a profound tactical advantage at the site of the crisis, right? At the theater of operations, which was restricted around the vicinity of the two rocks, the two islands. So, if hypothetically speaking, there was an order and they would be the first ones to press the button, then the result at the tactical level would most likely be a Greek victory. But I guess what people ought to ask themselves is what would follow afterwards. Would uh, would Greece be able to replicate this success at the strategic level if this whole conflict spilled over, which would definitely would all across the Greek-Turkish line of confrontation, from the land border at Evros to all across the
all the way to Cyprus,
all the way to
probably?
Cyprus, basically. Yeah, yeah. Where in Cyprus, the Turks would have both quantitative and qualitative advantage
Yeah,
on a
yeah,
semi-occupied island. Yeah.
yeah. It's a
So I
very good
guess
point.
that's the big uncomfortable question, if you will, because I mean the answer to that is not an easy one, right? Because
Yeah.
it's yeah. I mean we've put the cart before the horse, as you say. I think isn't this how the expression
That's
goes?
you got it. Yeah, the cart before the horse. You got
Yeah, yeah.
it.
So that you can achieve a tactical, I guess, military victory, but then you will not be able to secure the result at the strategic level. And I
Yeah.
think that's what most serious analysts, international relations experts, war experts, whatever. That's the how do you say the conclusion they have arrived
Right.
after studying the crisis and its aftermath for so many years. But yeah, to your question, whether this emboldened, it accelerated Turkish revisionism, we definitely did. Yeah, I mean, it opened the Pandora's box because Imia
Jeez.
was only the first two Greek islands which were disputed, and right after we get a list of approximately 150
Oh
Greek
my
islands,
gosh.
whose Greek sovereignty Turkey disputes on the basis again that they're not explicitly mentioned in any international agreement, be it the Lausanne Treaty or the 1947 Paris Treaty.
And these are inhabited islands too that have been expanded into the realm of Turkish claims. In other words, these are islands where people actually live now. Of those 156, there's a whole list per the invasion, for any
Yeah,
possible
I mean,
Turkish
yeah, a
invasion.
lot of them are inhabited. Yeah, I mean, some of them are not.
Right,
But
right,
remarkably, I mean, the list includes Gavdos. Gavdos is a small island south of Crete,
right.
which you would
Wow.
think is, way too far for Turkey to be concerned about. So apparently, yeah, there's no limit
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah. Well, on that note, I think we'll leave for today. I learned a lot of stuff here. I really appreciate this talk, and 30, I believe 31, 30 years or 31 years now on from EMEA.
30, 31? Yeah, I think it's 31.
31. I guess it depends what point you're pointing measuring from, whether you're doing the
Yeah,
January or the
December.
December. But 3 decades on, and we're still dealing with the consequences of EMEA, you could say. Really
Mhm.
appreciate the talk, and
Thank you
we
very
have
much
you.
for the invite once again. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have you back on again. Konstantinos actually has written a lot of other really cool articles, a lot of stuff over my head, which is why I have him on here to help explain them to me. So appreciate it a lot. All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hey, take care. Bye bye.